I gave him my last dollar, and he looked at me like I'd just handed him the world. The words tore out of Nora Morgan before she could stop them. Mountain Lodge kitchen, October snowstorm howling against the windows like something alive and furious, 11:47 at night. The clock on the wall ticked forward with mechanical precision, each second swallowed by the roar of wind and snow. She knelt in the blizzard outside the lodge's back in trance, her body already beginning to lose feeling from the cold. Her breath came in visible clouds, ragged and desperate. Against her chest, a 7-year-old boy trembled, his lips the color of bruised plums, his small fingers curling and uncurling as if he couldn't remember how to move them. The child's expensive snow jacket, water-stained and sodden, hung loose on his frame. His parents had money. Real money. The kind that doesn't count dollars. The kind that buys mountain lodges and staff and forgetting about your children for hours at a time. Nora pressed her last $5 bill into his palm. The bill was crumpled, worn soft from weeks of being the only money between her and nothing. She wrapped his frozen fingers around it, her own hand shaking not from cold but from the mathematics of what she was doing. $5. All of it. Everything. Hold it tight, she whispered, her voice trembling like a candle in the wind. Hold it and don't let go. Someone is coming to help you. Someone is coming right now. The boy's eyes, dark and terrified, fixed on her face. He didn't understand. He was 7 years old and hypothermic and confused, and he couldn't comprehend that this woman in a wet kitchen uniform, this nobody, had just given him her last possession of value on earth. Through the frosted glass of the lodge's back door, shadows moved. Silhouettes rushing. The sound of voices raised in alarm, frantic and authoritative. The door burst open and cold air crashed into warm, a collision that made the temperature inside the lodge drop like a curse. A man emerged. Tall. Broad-shouldered beneath an impossibly expensive charcoal coat, the kind that costs more than Nora's monthly rent. His hair was dark, with silver threading through at the temples. His face was carved like something from another century, sharp lines, sharper eyes, a scar running from below his left eye to his jawline like a blade had once tried to cut his story short and failed. When his gaze found the boy, everything in the world stopped moving. For 3 seconds, 3 full seconds that felt like hours, Luca Bianchi stood in that doorway and simply looked at his son. The storm raged. The boy trembled. Nora knelt in snow that was already beginning to cover her bare arms with frost. Then he moved. Not quickly. Deliberately. Each step measured and controlled, the way a general surveys a battlefield. He scooped the child into his arms and the boy gasped, not from pain, but from recognition. From safety. From the sudden knowledge that the person who could save him had arrived. Luca's eyes came back to Nora. Just for a moment. Just long enough that she felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. Then he was gone, back inside, back to warmth, back to the world where everything worked according to his will. Nora remained on her knees in the snow. Her uniform was soaked through. Her skin was beginning to go numb. Her hands, now empty of the $5 bill, hung at her sides like broken things. What she did not understand, what no one in that moment could have possibly understood, was that Luca Bianchi, the head of the most dangerous family in San Francisco, had been searching for someone like her for 15 years. Not a soldier. Not a lieutenant. Not a man bound to him by blood or business or fear. He had been searching for someone he could trust. Rewind. 2 hours earlier. The foreclosure notice was taped to the refrigerator with a single piece of clear tape, right beside Emma's drawing of the two of them holding hands. 14 days. That was the number that lived in Nora Morgan's chest like a second heartbeat. 14 days until the apartment ceased to be hers. 14 days until she and Emma moved to the shelter on Market Street, the one where single mothers slept in rows and children learned to be invisible. She counted the money again. The same bills, counted 3 times already, but maybe this time the numbers would be different. Maybe math would suddenly bend in her favor. 5 crumpled $1 bills. No coins. Nothing else. The kitchen lamp cast yellow light across the small table in her cramped apartment. The walls were water-stained in one corner. The radiator clanked and hissed but produced no heat. It was October, and San Francisco's cold was the kind that crept into your bones and stayed there for months. Nora was 28 years old but looked 40. Her hair, dark brown and pulled back in a braid that came loose by 10 in the morning, showed silver at the roots. Her hands were calloused from 1,000 shifts washing dishes. The scar on her inner wrist, thin and precise, a map of a place she didn't talk about anymore, throbbed with the apartment's cold. Emma slept in the next room. Their daughter was 7 years old and already understood arithmetic. She knew that $43 left, split across 14 days until the foreclosure, meant $3 a day for rent, for food, for survival. The child had stopped asking for things. That was the worst part. Emma had learned not to want. Nora's phone buzzed. A text from Ashford's Rooftop Bistro, the restaurant where she worked double shifts and triple shifts and any shift that existed in the dark hours when the tourists were sleeping. $200. Nora stared at the number on the screen until it burned into her vision. $200 would buy another week. It would push back the moment of falling, of becoming nothing, of dragging her daughter into the rows of sleeping mothers and children. She typed back, "I'll be there. 30 seconds later, driver picks you up at 4 p.m. Front of your building. Nora set her phone down. She looked at the 5 bills on the table. $5 to last until 4 in the afternoon. $5 for 2 people. She stood and opened the refrigerator. The light inside was harsh and truthful. A carton of milk with 3 days left before it curdled. Half a loaf of bread going hard at the edges. 3 apples from the grocery store discount bin, already beginning to show dark spots. Emma would eat breakfast before the driver came. Toast with the milk, 1 apple cut into pieces so it looked like more than it was. Nora would skip the meal. She would have done it before, would do it again. Her daughter's hunger was something Nora could not survive feeling. She pulled the bread out and set it on the counter. The knife was dull, she'd been meaning to sharpen it for 6 months, and it tore through the crust instead of cutting. In the other room, Emma turned in sleep. The sound of her shifting beneath the thin blanket made Nora's hand still. $200. $200 and the foreclosure notice would wait. Just a little longer. Just enough time to find another way, another shift, another miracle. The snow was coming to the mountains. The lodge emergency catering meant rich people with empty patience and high expectations. It meant the kinds of tips that made Douglas Hale's life easier, and made it harder for everyone working beneath him. But $200. Nora placed the toast in front of Emma's place at the table and waited for her daughter to wake. At 4 o'clock, a black SUV pulled up to the front of the building. Not a car. Not a regular vehicle. A black SUV with tinted windows and the kind of weight that made the street's asphalt seem temporary. Nora stood on the curb with a single bag, her chef's whites, her work shoes, her phone. She'd left Emma with Mrs. Chen from 3B, the grandmother who watched her for whatever Nora could spare from her tips. Today that had been $2. The most Mrs. Chen would accept was $1. The passenger window lowered. A man in a suit looked at her. Young face, old eyes. The kind of eyes that had seen things that couldn't be unseen. "You're the waitress," he said. "I'm Nora Morgan," she said. She was already moving toward the door. Already climbing into the vehicle that was not hers and did not want her and represented $200 of survival. 2 hours to the lodge. Storm's coming early. Douglas is furious about the timing. Nora nodded. She knew Douglas Hale's fury the way other people knew weather patterns. She could predict it, prepare for it, endure it. What she could not do was make it stop. The SUV pulled into traffic and the city moved past the windows, blocks of neighborhoods where people lived in apartments that would not have foreclosure notices taped to refrigerators. Nora watched them pass. She'd stopped wanting those lives about 3 years ago. Now she only wanted to not fall further. The mountains rose up ahead, and the sky was darkening with the kind of grey that came before snow. The driver was quiet. His hands were steady on the wheel. Something about the way he moved suggested he'd done this before, driven women in black SUVs to places that needed them, then waited for them to return changed. "First time at the lodge?" he asked. "Yes," Nora said. "It's big. Expensive. Old money people. The kind that don't see the staff." She understood. Invisible. That was the word. She'd been invisible so long that sometimes in her apartment alone with Emma, she had to check the mirror to confirm she still existed. The snow began as they climbed higher into the mountains. First as scattered flakes, then as something more determined. The road curved and the city disappeared behind them completely. There was only the snow and the darkness beginning to fall and the tires eating up the distance between Nora and $200. The lodge appeared through the white, a massive structure of dark wood and windows blazing with light. Expensive. Effortless. The kind of place where money had solved every problem and therefore the people who lived inside had forgotten that problems existed at all. "Go around to the kitchen entrance," the driver said. "Ask for Douglas. Tell him Marco sent you." Nora nodded and pushed open the door. The cold hit her like a blade wrapped in ice. Already the snow was gathering on the ground, beginning to pile up with the promise of a serious storm. She didn't know, as she walked toward the kitchen entrance, that Marco was not a regular driver. That the SUV was not registered to the catering company. That every decision made in this moment was already being watched by people whose job was to notice everything. She didn't know that a child was about to wander away from his parents. That a blizzard was about to separate what should never be separated. She didn't know that in less than 3 hours, she would give away her last $5 and change everything. Nora Morgan, 28 years old, invisible, exhausted, and carrying the weight of Emma's future in her chest, walked into the lodge kitchen and began her shift. Behind her, the snow continued to fall. The kitchen lamp cast shadows across Nora Morgan's face as she counted the bills for the third time. 5 $1 bills. Crumpled. Worn thin from handling. She spread them on the table beside the yellow foreclosure notice taped to her refrigerator, bright as a warning, cruel as mathematics. $22,000. 14 days. $5 in her hand. The apartment held its breath around her. Single-pane windows rattled with October wind. Dead leaves skittered across the fire escape outside, scraping like fingernails against glass. She could see her own breath inside her kitchen because the heat was off, had been off for 3 weeks. $72 a month saved was the difference between Emma eating lunch at school or eating lunch from the free basket in the cafeteria corner where the other children didn't ask questions. Emma slept in the only bedroom, a small shape barely visible under a quilt that had belonged to Nora's mother. 6 years old. Still believing her mother could fix anything. Still reaching for her hand in crowded places with absolute certainty that Nora would keep her safe. The weight of that certainty pressed down on Nora's chest. She looked at the shoes on the windowsill. Small. Worn. The first pair Emma had ever owned, purchased at the shelter 4 years ago when they'd fled with nothing but a garbage bag of clothes and the clothes they wore. Nora had kept them. She picked them up now, held them in her palm. They weighed almost nothing. The bus stop was 2 blocks away. Nora had memorized the schedules months ago, Route 47 at 8:43 p.m., arriving at the restaurant at 9:07 p.m., giving her exactly 13 minutes to change into her uniform before the dinner shift began. Tonight was different. Tonight she would work a private event at a mountain lodge, emergency kitchen staff, cash payment of $200. $200. The number felt impossible. Unreal. Like something spoken in a language she almost understood. She'd gotten the call that afternoon from Marco, a man whose voice was smooth as oil and careful as surgery. He'd asked if she was available. She'd said yes before he finished the sentence. "The pay is good," he'd said. $200 for 1 night. The work is simple. Kitchen prep and plating. Nothing complicated. Nothing complicated. Every word he spoke was a lie dressed in courtesy, but Nora had learned long ago that the specifics didn't matter. Work was work. Money was money. Emma needed shoes that fit her. The winter was coming. The eviction notice was real. She'd picked Emma up from after-school care at 5:17 p.m., walked her home through the steep San Francisco hills, the child's hand in her left pocket and 3 pennies in her right. They'd made dinner from 2 eggs and half a loaf of bread Marco's driver had delivered that morning, a gesture that terrified Nora because gestures never came without cost. Emma had chatted about her day. A boy named Samuel had shared his apple with her during lunch. She'd learned to skip count by 5s. Tomorrow was library day and she wanted a book about horses. Nora had listened and nodded and felt the foreclosure notice burning on the refrigerator like a door closing. At 9:01 p.m., she'd kissed Emma's forehead, whispered that she would be home by morning, that everything would be okay. The child had already been drifting toward sleep, her breathing deepening, her small fingers curled around the edge of Nora's sweater. She'd withdrawn carefully, quietly, the way you move away from something precious and fragile. The first bus was nearly empty. An old man dozed in the back row, his chin on his chest. A woman with 3 shopping bags sat by the window, staring out at nothing. Nora rode to the downtown station and switched to Route 9, heading south toward the mountains. The second bus was fuller, late-shift workers heading to night jobs, delivery drivers, people like her who lived in the margins of the city's elegant indifference. She pressed her forehead against the window and watched the neighborhoods change. The avenues widened. The buildings grew taller and more expensive. Doorways that had been dark became lit. Restaurants with actual tablecloths and flowers on every table. People walking past in coats that cost more than Nora's monthly rent. It was a journey she'd made 100 times in her mind but never in her body, the distance between the world where she lived and the world where people like Victoria Ashford existed without effort. The restaurant job had taught her that lesson brutally. Ashford's rooftop bistro sat on the 42nd floor of a building made entirely of glass and steel. The views were perfect. The clientele was perfect. The staff were interchangeable. Nora had worked there for 8 months, and in that time she'd learned that her invisibility was the only thing separating her from immediate firing. Douglas Hale managed the front of house with the philosophy of a man who believed every server was a thief waiting for opportunity. He'd begun pocketing her tips 3 weeks in. Nora had watched him slide cash from the table into his vest pocket, watched him smile at the customers, watched him turn to her and say, "You should be grateful anyone tips you at all. You're lucky I don't dock you for spilling that water glass." She hadn't spilled anything. But the math was simple: protest and lose the job. Stay silent and lose the money slowly. Both paths led to the same ending. Victoria Ashford came in twice a week to inspect her empire, moving through the restaurant like a surgeon in an operating theater. Everything had to be perfect. Everything had to reflect her impeccable taste. When it didn't, she would find whoever was responsible and correct them with the precision of someone teaching a child not to touch fire. Last week, she'd stopped at Nora's station while Nora refilled water glasses. "These are cloudy," Victoria had said. Her voice was high and clear and absolutely certain of its righteousness. She held one glass up to the light, showing it to the customers at the table, showing it to Nora. "This is not the standard I maintain. This is not what people pay for when they come to my restaurant." The customers had pretended not to notice. Nora had felt her face burning. "I apologize," she'd said. "I'll get clean ones immediately." "You will," Victoria had agreed. "And in the future, perhaps you'll remember that details matter. That some people can't afford to be careless." The implication had landed perfectly. Some people couldn't afford anything. People like Nora Morgan. People who were grateful for work at all, grateful for the chance to serve, grateful for the opportunity to fail publicly and be corrected in front of strangers. The bus descended from the city into darkness. Buildings gave way to trees. Traffic thinned. The driver took the curves faster, and Nora felt the pull of G-force against her body. Around her, the other passengers had thinned to almost nothing. An older woman with a knitting bag. A man in a suit reading something on his phone. A teenager with headphones on, lost somewhere private. At 9:53 p.m., the driver announced the Mountain Lodge turn-off. Nora stood, her legs stiff from sitting. The cold air from the opening doors hit her like a slap. She stepped down onto the shoulder of the road and watched the bus pull away, its red taillights disappearing into darkness. The sound of the engine faded. There was only wind now, and the rustle of branches overhead, and the distant sound of something moving through the forest. 3 miles. The driver had said it was 3 miles from the main road to the lodge. Nora had walked longer distances. She had a jacket, thin, worn, not nearly warm enough for November, but something. She had her phone with 15% battery. She had $5 in her pocket and $200 waiting at the end of the walk, and a daughter sleeping in an apartment that was slowly, inexorably being taken away from her. She started walking. The road curved upward. Her breath came in visible clouds. The wind was beginning to change, there was something different in it, something electric and heavy. Snow was coming. The forecast had mentioned possibility, not certainty, but Nora could feel it in the air like a promise kept. The lodge appeared through the gathering darkness like something from a dream. Massive. All dark wood and stone and windows blazing with light. The kind of place where money had solved every problem so completely that the people inside had forgotten problems existed. She could see movement behind the windows, servers in black clothing, the flash of expensive fabric, the glow of crystal and silver. A black SUV was parked near the entrance. A man in a driver's uniform was checking his watch, 2 wrist movements, perfectly timed, the kind of punctuality that came from years of people depending on you to be exact. Nora approached the vehicle, and the man looked up. His eyes scanned her, the worn jacket, the practical shoes, the absence of anything that suggested she belonged here, and understood everything. "You're with catering," he said. "Not a question." "Yes. Douglas Hale sent for me." "Go around to the kitchen entrance," he said. "Ask for Douglas. Tell him Marco sent you." Nora nodded. She didn't ask who Marco was. She knew better than to ask questions. Knowledge could be dangerous. Ignorance was a kind of protection. She walked around the lodge toward the kitchen entrance. The snow was beginning in earnest now. First as scattered flakes, then as something more determined. It gathered on her shoulders, on her hair. It would melt, but for now she felt it, cold touching her skin, the world changing its mind about what kind of night this would be. Behind her, the wind continued to fall. The kitchen entrance to the lodge swung inward with such force that snow scattered across the tile floor like shattered glass. Nora stumbled through, gasping, her bare arms already turning red from the cold. The boy's weight pressed against her chest, small, trembling, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Behind them, the blizzard had transformed into something alive and hungry, wind screaming through the open door like a thing with teeth. "Close that door!" A man's voice cut through the chaos. The door slammed shut. The sound of the lock engaging felt like the end of something and the beginning of something else entirely. Nora stood dripping snow onto the kitchen tiles, still holding the child. Her fingers had gone white at the tips. Around her, people in chef's whites and kitchen uniforms froze mid-motion, knives suspended over cutting boards, steam rising from copper pots. They stared at her as if she were a ghost who had just materialized from the storm itself. "Get paramedics," a voice commanded from somewhere deeper in the lodge. Not a request. A statement that would be obeyed before it finished being spoken. A woman in a black uniform rushed toward Nora with blankets. "Come. Come with me. We have warmth. We have heat." The woman's hands were gentle but urgent, guiding Nora toward a corridor that led away from the kitchen, away from the industrial fluorescent lights and the smell of roasted vegetables and expensive wine. The boy's eyes fluttered open slightly. His lips were blue. His whole body shook like a leaf caught in an updraft. "You're safe now," Nora whispered to him. "You're safe. Hold tight to that. Hold tight." They moved through the lodge, down a hallway lined with expensive art that Nora didn't recognize and couldn't afford to understand, and emerged into a great room that seemed to breathe with its own wealth. A massive fireplace roared with flames tall as a man. The stone around it glowed golden orange. Leather furniture arranged in clusters suggested conversations that cost millions of dollars. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the blizzard outside, now so thick that the world had become whiteness, a void pressing against the glass. The woman wrapped Nora in blankets. Someone appeared with hot tea. Nora's hands were shaking too severely to hold it, so they placed it on the small table beside her and she stared at it, watching steam rise into patterns that made no sense. Through an interior doorway, she saw paramedics in blue uniforms moving with practiced efficiency. They had taken the boy from her arms. She didn't remember releasing him, but she had. The moment his body left hers, she felt suddenly cold in a way that blankets couldn't touch. 20 minutes passed like this. 45. She lost count of time. The lodge staff moved around her with the careful courtesy people use around someone who has just nearly died. They didn't speak to her. They simply ensured she had everything. More tea. A dry uniform from somewhere, apparently kept for emergencies. Dry socks. A heating pad for her hands. That's when the room changed. It wasn't dramatic in the way Nora would have expected. There were no alarms. No sirens. Simply a shift in the quality of the air itself, the way a room knows when someone important has entered it. The staff straightened almost imperceptibly. Eyes lowered. Two men appeared in the interior doorway, massive, both of them, with shoulders that seemed to have their own gravity, wearing charcoal suits that fit like they'd been built specifically for their bodies. They didn't sit. They positioned themselves. And then Luca Bianchi walked into the room. He was tall, somewhere in his late 30s, with dark hair that touched his collar and eyes so dark they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His suit was black, tailored with precision that suggested the tailor had spent decades learning to understand what fabric could become. A thin scar ran from his left eye toward his cheekbone, not recent, but not old enough to have become invisible. Around his wrist, a watch with a face of brushed silver. On his hands, rings of white gold, each one catching the firelight and throwing it back like small accusations. He moved the way men move when they've spent their entire lives never having to question their right to occupy space. Every step deliberate. Every movement a decision that had already been made before the body executed it. Nora's breath caught. He walked directly to her. The two men remained by the doorway, their presence like a wall being built around the room. Luca looked down at Nora sitting in the leather chair, wrapped in blankets, still trembling. "You found my son," he said. His voice was quiet. That was what struck her most profoundly. Not loud. Not commanding. Just quiet, the way a knife is quiet before it cuts something. Nora stood, though she wasn't sure she could. The blankets fell. He was outside. In the snow. He was walking away from the lodge, and I saw him and She stopped. "Is he okay? Please tell me he's okay." Luca stepped closer. "Because of you, he is alive. The paramedics tell me another 10 minutes in that cold and they would have been recovering a body, not a boy." He paused. His dark eyes moved across her face as if he was reading text written in a language most people never learned. "You gave him your coat. The only coat you own." It wasn't a question. "He's a child," Nora said. "Yes." "He was cold." "Yes." "Then what else was there to do?" Luca didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched. She could hear the fire crackling. Could hear the wind outside, still howling, still trying to break through the glass. Could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, thundering like something trapped. Most people, he said finally, would have gotten help first. Gone back inside. Found someone with authority, someone with responsibility. Most people would have done that instead of stepping into a blizzard with bare arms. Most people aren't desperate enough, Nora said without thinking. Then she realized what she'd admitted and tried to step back from it. I just mean, when you have nothing to lose. What's your name? Nora Morgan. Luca turned slightly toward one of the men, the one on the left, whose face was all sharp angles and whose eyes seemed to calculate probabilities constantly. Marco, get me her information. Where she lives. Where she works. Then back to Nora, sit. She's Saturday. Luca sat across from her in a leather chair that seemed to have been waiting specifically for him. Up close, she could see the scar more clearly. Could see the tiredness beneath his eyes that no amount of sleep could cure. Could see a man who had made decisions that he was still living with. Tell me about yourself, Nora Morgan, he said. Why are you working in a kitchen at a mountain lodge in the middle of a blizzard? She shouldn't have told him. She knew this, some part of her brain screaming warnings about the danger of confession to strangers. But there was something about the way he listened, the way he didn't interrupt, didn't minimize, didn't look away, that made her tell him everything. She told him about Emma. About the apartment in San Francisco's outer Richmond district that wasn't really an apartment but a studio divided in half by a curtain. About the foreclosure notice taped to the refrigerator. About 14 days. About $22,000 that might as well be $22 million. I have $78 in my bank account, she said, and the numbness in her voice surprised even her. 78. From working 2 double shifts a week for 3 months. I counted it this morning under my kitchen lamp at 3 in the morning because I couldn't sleep. 40 years old and this is what I have. This is what Emma's mother has given her. Luca's expression didn't change, but she saw his hands form into fists against the arms of the chair. Not angry. Just controlled. Like a man who had learned long ago that anger had to be transformed into something useful or it would destroy you. You're not 40, he said. I look 40. Yes. But you're not. She didn't tell him that life had aged her faster than time. That wasn't something that needed to be explained to someone like this, someone who clearly understood already. Why did you come here tonight? Luca asked. Douglas Hale, my manager at Ashford's Rooftop Bistro, he told me there was work. $200 for 7 hours of kitchen prep during an event. I needed $200 for Emma's school uniform. She starts at Lincoln High next month and... Nora stopped. Why was she telling a stranger this? I needed the work. Douglas Hale, Luca said. He didn't ask for details. Marco made a note on his phone anyway. And who owns the restaurant? Victoria Ashford. She's... Nora searched for words. She's cruel in a way that feels calculated. She doesn't yell. She's quiet about it, which is worse. Last week she made me stand in the dining room and told a table of customers that this is why she regrets hiring people from my neighborhood. She said I was incompetent. She said it in front of everyone. Enzo, the second man, shifted slightly. His hand moved to his phone. Whatever he was about to do, Luca raised a single finger and he stopped. Why did you stay? Luca asked. Because I need the job. Because if I don't work, Emma doesn't eat. Because I don't have the luxury of leaving when something is wrong. Nora's voice cracked slightly. Because I'm terrified of what happens if I lose my income by even a single day. Luca leaned back in the chair. He looked at the fireplace for a moment. 3 years ago, he said, my own brother sold me. Sold my family to people who wanted us destroyed. My own blood, someone I had trusted with my life, decided that the price he could get for betrayal was worth more than loyalty. After that, I spent every day searching for someone I could trust. Someone who would choose a stranger's child over their own survival. Someone like that. He turned back to her. You came to my lodge tonight as a substitute kitchen worker making $200. You found my son freezing to death in a storm. You gave him your only coat. And in your pockets, you had $5. 5. You gave him a $5 bill because you thought it would help him feel less lost. Nora's throat tightened. She remembered the shelter, years ago. Someone giving Emma a dollar bill. Emma clutching it like it was a map home. "It was something I learned once," Nora whispered. Luca nodded slightly, as if this confirmed something he'd already suspected. "The $200 you earn tonight, you'll receive it. But I want to ask you something. If I could solve the problem, if I could make the $22,000 foreclosure disappear, would you accept?" The answer came immediately, almost violently. No. The word hung in the air. Enzo's eyes widened slightly. Marco glanced at his boss, waiting. Luca actually smiled. Just barely. Just enough that the scar on his cheek shifted slightly. "Not charity," he said. "An investment. The kind of person you are, Nora Morgan, is rarer than you understand. Most people have been hollowed out by survival. You haven't. You still have something that most people spend their entire lives destroying." He stood. "My son's name is Leonardo. He's 7 years old. He has night terrors. He wandered away because of the storm. He said the sound helped him calm down. You found him. You saved him. That matters to me in ways that I don't have words for." He pulled a card from his jacket pocket and placed it on the small table beside the cold tea. "If Douglas Hale or Victoria Ashford ever threaten you again, you call this number. Do you understand?" Nora looked at the card. Black. Embossed letters in silver, Luca Bianchi. A phone number. Nothing else. "I don't understand," Nora said. "Why would you help me?" "Because the people who did this to you, who believed that you were nobody, that your suffering didn't matter, need to understand that belief is a mistake." He left then, Marco and Enzo following like shadows. The moment the door closed, the room felt larger and smaller simultaneously, larger because his absence created space, smaller because his presence had been so complete. Nora stared at the card in her trembling hands. On the long bus ride home through snow turning to rain, through San Francisco emerging from the storm like something being born, she held the card and wondered who she had just met. Through the bus windows, the city glowed with neon and streetlights. Somewhere ahead, Emma was sleeping with a neighbor who watched her on nights like this. Somewhere ahead was the apartment. The foreclosure notice. The $78. Her phone buzzed. A text from Douglas Hale, "Triple shift tomorrow. 6 a.m. Don't be late." She closed her eyes. The card pressed against her palm like a talisman. Like a promise. Like something that didn't make sense yet but someday might. Outside, the rain fell on the city like mercy. Or like a warning. Or like both, and Nora Morgan had no way of knowing which. Nora Morgan sat on the cold bathroom tile at midnight, the foreclosure notice crumpled in her trembling hands. 10 days. $22,000. She had $43 to her name after paying for Emma's lunch account at school. The math didn't work. It had never worked, not since the shelter, not since she'd held her daughter for the first time in a room that smelled like disinfectant and broken promises. She thought about Douglas Hale's voice that afternoon in the supply closet, how he'd blocked the door while the dinner rush thundered beyond it. $300 by Friday, he'd said, stepping closer until her back met the metal shelves. Or I call CPS. Tell them you're neglecting your kid. Tell every restaurant in this city you're a thief. His breath smelled like stale coffee and menace. She'd met his eyes even though fear was eating her alive from the inside out, and she'd said, "You can't do this." His laugh had been a blade wrapped in ice. "Watch me." Then came Victoria Ashford's office, mahogany and cruelty, the older woman sitting behind her desk like a judge delivering a sentence. 2 shifts per week now. $3 less per hour. And I'll be providing references. The smile had been the worst part, the satisfaction in it, the knowledge that she was systematically destroying something living. People like you need to learn your place. Nora's phone sat on the bathroom sink. Beside it, the black card with silver letters, Luca Bianchi. A phone number. Nothing else. She was too proud to call. too ashamed to admit that the Mountain Lodge job hadn't saved her, that one $5 bill given to a hypothermic child hadn't changed anything except to remind her that she had nothing left to give. She picked up her phone instead and texted Douglas Hale, "I'll have your money Friday." She had no idea how. From Emma's room came a small sound, her daughter coughing in sleep, a delicate, vulnerable thing. Nora stood, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and made a decision that had nothing to do with strength and everything to do with survival. She would find a way. She always did. Even if it meant taking on more shifts, even if it meant her body broke from exhaustion, even if it meant disappearing into work until there was nothing left of her but the ghost of a woman trying to save her child. She didn't know that Luca Bianchi had been waiting for a reason to move. She didn't know that Marco and Enzo had spent 3 days documenting everything, every stolen tip, every fraudulent charge, every threat Douglas Hale had made to a dozen other servers across 5 restaurants. She didn't know that federal agents were coordinating with Luca's own investigators, that evidence had been carefully compiled and delivered to the FBI with instructions so precise they could have been military orders. What she didn't know was that at 5:08 a.m. on Thursday morning, the rain would stop and the sky would clear, and Douglas Hale would wake to the sound of his door being breached. 12 federal agents in FBI windbreakers surrounded his house. 3 black SUVs blocked the street. The tactical precision was absolute, the kind of coordination that came from resources most people couldn't fathom. Douglas stumbled from bed in his underwear, confused, still tasting sleep, when they burst through his bedroom door. "Douglas Hale, you're under arrest for tax evasion, wage theft, extortion, and fraud." He fell to his knees before they even finished reading his rights. His hands trembled as they were zip-tied behind his back. His mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water, gasping for air that wouldn't come. "No, please, I can explain. I have money. I can pay." The cameras flashed. News helicopters circled overhead. By 6:15 a.m., every local news station was broadcasting the image of Douglas Hale being led from his home in handcuffs, his face twisted in shock and terror. The FBI spokesperson mentioned an anonymous tip that had provided documented evidence of systematic theft spanning 8 years. The investigation reveals the defendant stole over $200,000 from servers across 5 establishments, the agent said into the camera, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. This was not impulsive crime. This was predatory, calculated exploitation of vulnerable workers. 40 years federal prison. The sentence came down like a guillotine. At 9:15 a.m. that same morning, Victoria Ashford's phone rang. By 9:51 a.m., federal investigators arrived at her office with warrants that felt like executioner's axes. She sat behind her mahogany desk, the one where she destroyed Nora with a smile, and watched her empire collapse in real time. Her accountant's face went white as investigators reviewed her files. Money laundering. Tax fraud. Labor law violation spanning 15 years. The financial crimes were so extensive that the penalties would bankrupt her completely. Her face appeared on the news at 10:02 a.m., mouth open in a perfect O of shock as she was escorted from her building by federal agents. The camera caught the moment her social circle abandoned her, partners refusing her calls, wealthy friends crossing the street to avoid her, the entire careful architecture of her social standing imploding like a building with its foundations removed. The public humiliation was total and irreversible. Every piece of cruelty she'd inflicted on others was now multiplied 1,000 times over. Her name would be synonymous with fraud. Her restaurants would be seized. Her assets would be frozen. Death would have been too quick, too easy, too merciful. This was justice, watching everything they built with cruelty crumble while they faced decades of consequences. Nora watched the news at Ashford's that afternoon. The restaurant was still operating, but new management was already in place. A woman named Patricia, kind-eyed, with grey in her hair and a way of treating people like they mattered. She'd arrived that morning with federal documents and a directive to restore the restaurant under new ownership. Patricia approached Nora near the host stand, where Nora stood with trembling hands, staring at the screen. "Nora, I need to tell you something. The FBI contacted me this morning." They have documented evidence of wage theft affecting you and 17 other servers. Nora couldn't speak. All stolen tips are being returned to staff, Patricia continued, her voice gentle. You're on the restitution list. The check will arrive by Monday. We're also raising the base wage by $4 per hour effective immediately, and you're getting your full 6-shift schedule back. A check arrived the following Monday. $6,000. Her stolen money returned. Money she'd counted out penny by penny, money that had been extracted from her like blood from a wound, now reversed, now returned. She still didn't connect it to the card in her wallet. Not until that evening, when Marco appeared at her apartment door, his tall frame filling the doorway, his dark eyes holding something she couldn't quite read. He wore an expensive suit, charcoal gray, tailored, the kind of suit that cost more than she'd earn in a month. Behind him stood Enzo, broader, scarred, moving like a man who'd survived things that would break ordinary people. Ms. Morgan, Marco said, and his voice was careful, respectful. Luca Bianchi would like to see you. There's a car downstairs. Emma is welcome to come as well. Nora's heart stopped. What is this about? He'll explain everything, Marco said. But you need to understand something first. You saved his son's life. Everything that happened this week, it was necessary. The men who threatened you, the woman who humiliated you, they've harmed many people. Luca simply ensured that the harm stopped. Through the apartment window, Nora could see a black car waiting on the street below, engine running, rain beginning to fall again. She looked at Marco. She looked at the card still in her wallet. She thought about $5 given to a hypothermic child, about a coat left behind in a blizzard, about the principle that some people are worth saving simply because they save others first. Let me get Emma, she said. The rain fell harder as they descended the stairs, Emma's small hand gripping Nora's, Marco and Enzo moving like shadows on either side of them. The car door opened. Inside sat a man she recognized from the mountain lodge, dark eyes, expensive coat, the kind of presence that made the world organize itself around him. Luca Bianchi looked at Nora Morgan, and in his gaze was something she'd never seen before, recognition. Not of her face, but of her essence. Of the woman who gave away her last possession to save a stranger's child. Thank you for coming, he said quietly. There's something you need to understand about what happened this week. And something I need to understand about you. The car pulled into traffic, moving through the rain-soaked streets of San Francisco, moving toward a future that neither of them could yet see. 1 year later, the October sun touched the horizon without mercy. San Francisco stretched below in copper and gold, the same city that had tried to crush Nora Morgan into dust, now gleaming like a promise she had somehow kept with herself. She stood in the corner office on the 42nd floor, her reflection caught in the floor-to-ceiling glass. The woman looking back wore a charcoal blazer she had purchased with money she had earned. Her hair was pulled back, professional, no longer matted from double shifts and sleepless nights. Her hands, once cracked and bleeding from kitchen work, now held a consulting contract worth $75,000. The signature at the bottom was hers. Nora Morgan. Restaurant labor consultant. 2 hours earlier, she had signed that contract. 2 hours before that, Emma had brought home a report card with straight A's across every subject, the paper trembling in Nora's hands like it might dissolve into nothing. 6 A's. 1 perfect semester at Riverside Academy, a school where the tuition had seemed impossible last October, where the impossible had somehow become her daughter's daily reality. The apartment they lived in now had heat that worked in every room. The refrigerator did not need to be checked 3 times daily to confirm there was actually food inside. Emma slept in her own bedroom with a desk and a lamp and books that lined the shelves, books that belonged to them, that they owned, that no one could take away. There was a bathtub with hot water. There were clean towels. There was butter and milk and fruit that did not go bad because Nora could afford to replace it before it spoiled. Nora touched the glass, feeling the cool certainty of it beneath her palm. She had done this. Through 17 months of consulting contracts, through careful budgeting that never quite broke the habit of fear, through refusing charity even when it came through Marco with a gentle smile and a business card for opportunities, she had built something real. Something unshakable. And yet, tucked in her wallet, behind the photo of Emma at her school entrance ceremony, behind the receipt from the apartment lease she had renewed without a co-signer, was a cream-colored business card. The edges had begun to fray from handling. The ink was still sharp. Luca Bianchi. No title. No phone number. Just a name and an address in the financial district. She had never called it. She had never used it. But she had carried it through every moment of reconstruction, through every time her old fear whispered that it would all disappear, that she would wake up to find herself back in that cramped apartment with $5 and a foreclosure notice taped to the refrigerator. Because she knew. On some level that operated below thought, she knew that the foreclosure payment that had arrived exactly 1 year ago, the anonymous wire transfer for the full amount, $22,000, paid in full on the day after Douglas Hale's federal arrest, had come from him. She knew that the FBI investigation into the wage theft ring, into the systematic extortion of servers at Ashford's rooftop bistro, had moved with a speed and precision that no government agency could have orchestrated without help. She knew that Victoria Ashford's financial crimes had surfaced at exactly the moment they became strategically useful, that every element of her salvation had been choreographed by someone with power that operated in the spaces where law enforcement was still finding its footing. What Nora did not know was why he had chosen to help her, or whether the help came with a cost that she had not yet been asked to pay. The business dinner had been unexpected. Her consulting firm, the one she had built with her own 2 hands and a reputation for turning around restaurants with labor violations, had been contracted to reform operations at a high-end penthouse establishment called the Meridian. The owner, a neutral party with no connection to Luca Bianchi that Nora could discern, had invited her to preview the space at 7 in the evening, to walk the kitchen, to assess the staff situation. The car that picked her up had a driver in a black suit. The ride was silent except for the sound of rain beginning to fall, a October cold that scraped against the windows. Nora had dressed carefully in professional clothes, had checked her appearance 3 times before leaving Emma with the neighbor, had told herself that this was just another consultation, that the city was full of penthouse restaurants, that coincidence was still possible in a universe governed by probability rather than conspiracy. The elevator climbed. The doors opened onto a space that stole her breath. Floor-to-ceiling windows, the kitchen visible through glass walls, copper fixtures and marble counters, and beyond all of it, the entire city of San Francisco laid out like a circuit board of light. The sun was setting. The rain fell diagonally, catching the last amber rays and transforming them into something that looked almost like grace. The owner was not there. The staff was not there. The kitchen was empty. Only a single man stood on the balcony, silhouetted against the dying light, his hands resting on the stone railing. Luca Bianchi. Nora's breath caught in her chest. She did not move. Her body had gone rigid, as if she were being presented with something impossible that might shatter if she acknowledged it too quickly. He did not turn around. He spoke to the city, to the rain, to the light that was draining from the sky. The owner of this restaurant called me 3 months ago, his voice said, deep and solid like an oath carved into stone. He wanted to ensure the space was legitimate, that it would be owned and operated without interference from anyone in my world. I told him to hire you. I told him that his reputation would survive or fail based entirely on how he treated his employees, and that if he wanted both profit and integrity, he should hire a woman who understands what it means to be invisible in a system designed to exploit you. Nora's hands were shaking. She gripped the edge of the glass wall. It was you. Her voice was barely audible, a whisper that the rain almost swallowed. All of it. The foreclosure. The investigation. Douglas and Victoria. Luca turned. His eyes found hers across the distance of the balcony. He was still wearing the dark overcoat from the mountain lodge, or one exactly like it, expensive enough to cost more than Nora's annual salary before the consulting work began. Yes, he said simply. Why? The word emerged broken, fractured. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Luca moved toward her, his footsteps measured and unhurried, each step deliberate. He maintained distance, stopping at the far end of the balcony, his silhouette still against the rain. My son asked me when we returned from the mountain lodge if you would survive the winter. He was 7 years old. He had been hypothermic. You gave him your coat and your last $5, and you asked for nothing in return. My men found you 3 days later, still at the restaurant, still working, still counting pennies to keep Emma in school. He paused. My son asked me if you would survive the winter, and I realized I did not have an answer. I realized I had never met anyone who gave from absolute emptiness. I had only ever met people who gave with the expectation of receiving something greater in return. Nora's eyes filled with tears. She did not let them fall. So you paid for my apartment. You had Douglas arrested. You destroyed Victoria Ashford. I ensured that the harm stopped, Luca said. But I did not ensure that you rebuilt your life. That was you. All of it. He turned fully to face her now, and in the fading light, his expression was almost vulnerable, a crack in something that had seemed unbreakable. I watched you this year. Consulting contracts. Emma's school. The apartment you keep immaculate. You refused help at every step. You built something real because you are strong, not because you felt obligated to me. Do you understand why I did not tell you? Nora shook her head, unable to speak. Because I needed to know if your character was real. If the woman who gave my son her last possession in a blizzard was someone I could trust with my life. And you proved it, not by knowing I had helped you, but by refusing to wait for help and building your own survival anyway. The rain fell harder. Wind moved across the balcony like something with breath. 3 years ago, my brother betrayed me, Luca continued, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to bend the air around them. He was the person I trusted most, and he sold everything to our enemies. I learned that day that trust was a luxury that people like me cannot afford. I learned that everyone has an agenda. So I survived alone, and I became very good at making sure others understood the cost of betrayal. He looked at the city, at the lights that were beginning to multiply as darkness fell. Then a woman in a worn apron gave my son her coat without knowing who I was, without expecting anything in return. She proved me wrong about people. She proved that some human beings are motivated by something other than greed or fear. Nora stepped toward him. The distance between them seemed to shrink with each heartbeat. You protected me, she said. Even when I didn't know it. You gave me space to rebuild without obligation. You didn't ask for anything. I'm asking now, Luca said quietly. The rain struck his dark hair, soaked the shoulders of his coat. I'm asking you to understand that what you did for my son, what you refused to do with the opportunities one gave you, you taught me how to be human again. You showed me that goodness exists, and that it's worth protecting. He paused. The city lights doubled below them as the sun finally surrendered. I'm asking you to accept that sometimes when we save others, we are also being saved. Nora's hand reached out. His hand met hers. The contact was electric, a moment of pure recognition that seemed to exist outside of time, outside of the architecture of their separate worlds. Emma asked about you, Nora said. After we left the mountain. She asked if the nice man in the dark coat would come back. I didn't know what to tell her. I'm here now, Luca said. His thumb traced the inside of her wrist, a gesture so tender it seemed impossible that this man, this figure of power and controlled violence, could know such gentleness. If you'll let me be. They stood together on the balcony, the city stretching below them, the rain falling in sheets that transformed the lights into watercolor smears of color and warmth. Behind them, the restaurant space was empty and perfect, a future waiting to be inhabited. Nora thought of Emma at school, of her report card, of the child who had asked about the nice man in the dark coat. She thought of $5 given to a hypothermic child, of a coat left behind in a blizzard, of every small moment when she had chosen kindness over survival. She thought of the foreclosure notice taped to her refrigerator, of the moment she had believed her life would end in shameful loss. It had not ended. It had transformed. And standing here, with Luca Bianchi's hand in hers, watching the October rain fall on the city that had tried to destroy her, Nora Morgan finally understood something that fear had never let her see before. Sometimes salvation comes not from the person who saves you, but from the person who recognizes that you saved yourself first. If this story moved your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that kindness matters. Subscribe and turn on notifications because tomorrow we have another story about a person who refused to be broken by circumstance. Drop a comment telling us about someone who helped you when you had nothing. We read every single one. And remember this truth as you move through your own life: sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. Thank you for staying with us until the end. We will see you again in the next video.